Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. Today I'm celebrating Climate Independence Day. The U.S. has had some very hot July 4ths, but none were hotter than July 4th, 1911. Temperatures over 100 degrees were recorded that day from Maine to California, shown as these purple dots. There was a huge area in the midsection of the U.S. and extending up into New England over 100 degrees. Every state except for Rhode Island recorded temperatures over 90 degrees that day, and an incredible 30 states had temperatures over 100 degrees. Heat like that in the U.S. is completely inconceivable now. This graph shows the July 4th, 1911 maximum temperature by state. I'm going to read all the states which were over 100 degrees that day. Arizona, 112. California, 111. Nebraska, 110. Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma were 109. Iowa was 108. Tennessee was 107. Indiana, Massachusetts, and New York were 106 degrees. Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Texas were 105 degrees. Michigan, Utah, and Wisconsin were 104 degrees. Minnesota, New Hampshire, Ohio, South Dakota, and West Virginia were 103 degrees. Louisiana, Maine, and Vermont were 102 degrees. Idaho was 101 degrees, and New Jersey and Virginia were 100 degrees. We now associate this very hot weather with the desert Southwest, but it used to occur all over the country. Here's an article from the Baltimore Sun, July 5, 1911. Fierce heat persists. Toll of death grows. 3 dead here. Score prostrated. Many fatalities reported in other cities of the country. New England scorches under temperatures of 100 to 104 degrees. Dozens of people died in the U.S. during that 1911 heat wave. But France had it much worse. During the summer of 1911, they had a 70-day-long heat wave which killed more than 40,000 people in Paris. Compare that to this year's so-called record heat wave, which lasted for 5 days and killed nobody in France. But back to the U.S. This graph shows a number of states with their hottest July 4th versus year. 12 states had their hottest July 4th in 1911, but 1936 was also very hot. 5 states had their hottest July 4th that year. This map shows temperatures in the U.S. on July 4th, 1936, and once again the purple dots show temperatures over 100 degrees. The heat wave of 1911 was mostly focused on the eastern half of the country, whereas in 1936 it was a little further west, although it was more intense. On July 4th, 1936, there were 6 states over 110 degrees and 21 states over 100 degrees. These 6 states over 110 degrees were Arizona, California, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, and Kansas. Climate alarmists now get hysterical about 110-degree weather in the desert Southwest, but 80 years ago it occurred all over the Midwest. Here's a newspaper article about the July 4th, 1936 heat wave. New heat wave hits Midwest. Wheat and corn wilt. Cattle and hogs die in stricken drought area. Temperatures soar far over 100, touching record 110 in Omaha. And that was just the beginning of the 1936 heat wave. Temperatures got much higher over the next month or two. I'll be talking about that in later videos. But look at the paragraph at the bottom. It says mercury at 83.8 in Alaska. Nome, Alaska, July 4th. Nome again recorded a new record heat wave today with the official listing at 83.8 degrees. The previous record of 81.4 degrees was recorded Wednesday afternoon. This hot weather in Alaska on July 4th, 1936 led me to some other very interesting information. So I'm going to diverge away from July 4th for a little while and talk about some other topics. Nome, Alaska has only had 1 day hotter than July 4th, 1936, and that was August 1st, 1977 when they reached 86 degrees. 1977 was a very interesting year. National Geographic called it the year the weather went wild. Almost the entire citrus crop in Florida was destroyed by cold weather that winter. It snowed in Miami in January 1977, the only time that's ever happened. And it was warmer in Alaska than it was in Florida in January 1977. Buffalo, New York had their all-time record snowstorm. You can see someone digging their car out of the snow, which was completely buried. I spent Christmas 1976 to New Year's 1977 in Boston that year, and the snow was just incredible. So what caused this incredible weather? Well, it was the polar vortex. There was a big ridge of high pressure over Alaska and the western U.S. and a huge dip going down into Florida. This brought very warm air up into Alaska and very cold air into the eastern U.S. California was having a terrible drought in 1977 as a result of that jet stream pattern. March 7, 1977, Governor Jerry Brown warned here today that drought-stricken California was facing a disaster of immeasurable magnitude. Not many people remember this because a few months later California was flooding. Exactly the same story as 2016. On May 9, 2016, Governor Jerry Brown and the New York Times announced the unending drought. A few months later, they had their wettest winter on record. It appears that climate alarmists and progressives in general are incapable of learning from history, even their own history. And there it was, August 16, 1977. Long-term drought suggests a change in climate. I was working in Los Alamos that year, and in June 1977 there was a terrible forest fire which burned up most of Bandelier National Monument. Well, Bandelier looks much better now than it did before that fire, and I'll be discussing that in a later video. So what was the New York Times blaming the climate change on at that time? Well, it was global cooling, of course. International team of specialists finds no end in sight to 30-year cooling trend in northern hemisphere. Science News had this great cover, "The Ice Age Cometh, Glaciers Plowing Through New York City." Climate change, chilling possibilities. The unusually beneficial climate of the past few decades may be degenerating, facing humanity with a new challenge to survival. I guess we needed an extinction rebellion in 1977 to save us from global cooling. And there it was. This graph was from the National Academy of Sciences showing the 30-year cooling trend, which NASA has since erased, and everything was due to the jet stream. But other scientists blamed it on sunspots. New York Times, February 22, 1977. Sun activity linked to drought and cold. A group of solar physicists and climatologists told a National Science Convention today that the bizarre weather of the last year may have been caused in part by abnormal activity on the surface of the sun. The scientists said that all available evidence pointed to another year or two of cold winters in the eastern and central states and drought in the western U.S. And they were correct in their predictions about cold winters. 1977, 1978, and 1979 were the three coldest winters in the eastern U.S. Now climate experts say that solar activity has very little to do with climate change and that it's just about all controlled by carbon dioxide. Those would be the same experts who predicted a warm winter in the United States last year, which was actually one of our coldest winters. That will be the topic of my next video. But now let's go back a little bit further to the summer of 1976, which was the hottest and driest summer on record in England. August 27, 1976, drought threatens England's industry. The National Water Council took out full-page ads in all national papers Thursday to warn that everybody must save water so that industry can keep going in the midst of the severe drought. I wasn't in England that summer, but I was there during the summers of 1969 and 1970, which were also very warm and dry. And all of this warmth and drought was going on during the global cooling scare. That winter, President Ford tried skiing at Vail, but there wasn't any snow. December 19, 1976. No snow. Ford's going to Vail. Denver. A minister is fasting. A radio station just finished broadcasting 24 hours a day, and a famous resort is resorting to Indian dancers, all in an attempt to bring snow to Colorado's skiing areas. There was very little skiing here in Colorado in the winter of 1976-1977, but that brings us back to July 4th. People are skiing here in Colorado today. This is a webcam of the skiers at A Basin, July 4th, 2019 at 1:20 p.m. A huge crowd of skiers. And it's not just Colorado. People are skiing all over the West today. So think about that. You couldn't ski in Colorado in the winter of 1976-1977, but you can in the summer of 2019. That doesn't sound like catastrophic heating to me. This is a graph of the average July 4th maximum temperature at all 1,200 U.S. historical climatology network stations. As you can see, July 4th temperatures have been going down in the U.S. since the 19th century. And there you can see 1911, that extremely hot July 4th. This graph shows the July 4th percent of hot stations at all U.S. historical climatology network stations going back to 1895. Blue shows the percent over 100 degrees, red shows the percent over 105 degrees, and yellow shows the percent over 110 degrees. So the five hottest July 4ths in the U.S. were 1911, 1936, 1937, 1901, and 1934, all more than 80 years ago. And you can see that the likelihood of very hot weather on July 4th has been declining in the U.S., with recent years being the coolest on record. So as climate alarmism increases, hot weather decreases. These graphs are from the National Climate Assessment, and they show the same things which I've been showing you. Heat wave magnitude, the warmest temperature, and the length of the heat waves have all declined sharply since the 1930s. Climate scientists are obviously aware of this because they're the ones who created these graphs. So why do we see stories like this in the press? Climate change footprints were all over Europe's latest heat wave study finds. Heat wave nudged the planet to its hottest June, European forecasters say. Climate change in the European heat wave. It's complicated. It's not complicated, it's just plain wrong. During the heat wave of 1911, more than 40,000 people died in Paris. The heat wave lasted 70 days. This year, nobody died in Paris, and the heat wave only lasted 5 days. How is that the footprint of climate change? It's all complete nonsense. And look at this. America's leading medical groups declare public health emergency over climate change. So why don't the hundreds of climate scientists who prepare the National Climate Assessments speak out and correct them? They know that summers are much cooler now in the U.S. than they used to be. But they won't speak out against the misinformation because their careers would be destroyed if they did. My good friend Dr. Bill Gray, who was the world's leading tropical meteorologist and the guy who invented hurricane forecasting, found this out the hard way. Dr. Gray from Colorado State University got funding from NOAA for his hurricane research every year from the 1960s until 1993. That was when Al Gore took office as vice president. Gore invited Dr. Gray to a global warming meeting he was having. Bill said he would be happy to attend, but Gore needed to know that he was not a big fan of Gore's global warming theories. Well, that was the end of Dr. Gray's funding. He never got another penny out of the government. Everyone in the climate business knows this. If you toe the line, you get money, prestige, funding, you get a good life. You get to go to conferences in tropical places like Cancun and Bali. But if you go up against the climate mafia, you'll be viciously attacked. You'll get your funding cut off. You'll be investigated by Democrats in Congress. What happened to Dr. Gray was a terrible situation, reminiscent of Galileo in the 16th century. But Bill was a man of incredible integrity. He never backed down and never regretted his decisions. And on his deathbed, he asked me to carry on his climate legacy, which is a lot of the reason I'm doing this. Before I wrap this up, here's a July 4th reminder. This was the lead story from July 5th, 1936. U.S. counts over 123 holiday dead. Fireworks can be very dangerous. Lots of people used to die in fireworks accidents. I'm headed up to Fort Collins in a few minutes, but Fort Collins just isn't the same place anymore without Dr. Gray. Wish I could celebrate July 4th with Bill, but he passed away 3 years ago this spring. I was up at the National Center for Atmospheric Research this afternoon and saw this amazing exhibit in their museum. It was basically saying that the world depends on the choices we make. We have to give up our cars, our meat, change everything in our lifestyle to prevent a climate catastrophe. As we've been seeing, this has nothing to do with science. It's about people who want to control our lives and take away our freedom. Well, today is July 4th. It was the day when our forefathers declared their independence from Great Britain. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Well, as this NCAR exhibit clearly shows, whoever's behind this climate scam is trying to take away your liberty. This is not about science, it's about tyranny, and July 4th, 2019 would be a great day to declare as Climate Independence Day. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.